In 1920, the citizens of Cincinnati voted to build a subway. They approved the bonds, paid their taxes, watched the excavators tear open the ground beneath their city, and then waited and waited and waited. No train ever ran through those tunnels. Not one. Not even a test run. The platforms were built, the stations were carved, the concrete was poured, and then the whole thing was sealed behind walls of brick and steel, right beneath one of the busiest boulevards in Ohio. 6 stations, 2 miles of tunnel, completed, structurally sound, and utterly empty for nearly a century. But here's the part that almost nobody knows. In 1960, 32 years after the subway was officially abandoned, the federal government quietly converted one of those sealed stations into a nuclear fallout bunker. No public vote, no city council debate, no announcement of any kind. Just workers going underground with cots, water tanks, ventilation equipment, and survival rations, converting a ghost station into a Cold War emergency shelter for government officials. The people of Cincinnati were not told. The people of Cincinnati are, by and large, still not aware it happened. The tunnels are still there today. The bunker infrastructure, by multiple accounts, was never fully removed. And most Cincinnatians driving over Central Parkway on any given morning have absolutely no idea what exists beneath their wheels. This is the story of what killed the Cincinnati Subway, who benefited from its death, and what the government quietly built inside its bones. To understand how a city ends up with an abandoned subway beneath its streets, you have to go back further than 1920. You have to go back to a canal that had outlived its purpose, and to the moment a city decided to dream underground. The Miami and Erie Canal had once been the economic artery of Cincinnati. For decades, it carried freight, goods, and people across Ohio, connecting the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River through the city's beating commercial heart. At its peak, Cincinnati was one of the 7 largest cities in the United States, a manufacturing giant, a river port, a city with genuine ambitions to rival Chicago and New York. The canal was central to that identity. But by the late 1800s, railroads had rendered it obsolete almost overnight. The canal sat stagnant and polluted, used as a dumping ground by residents and businesses alike. It became an open sewer running through the middle of a city that was trying to grow. The smell alone was a civic embarrassment. City planners looked at that dead waterway and saw something else entirely. The canal bed, they argued, was already excavated. It was already graded. It ran directly through the densest commercial corridors of the city. Why spend years acquiring new land and tearing up functioning streets when the route was already there, waiting to be deepened and enclosed? It was, on paper, one of the most elegant infrastructure solutions in American urban history. In 1916, Cincinnati citizens voted 30,165 to 14,286 in favor of a $6 million rapid transit bond, a genuine landslide of civic optimism. The plan called for a 16-mile loop connecting downtown Cincinnati with the surrounding suburbs of Norwood, Oakley, Clifton, and the West End. Supporters included every major newspaper in the city, business associations and trade unions alike. One advertisement declared with the confidence of another era, "Every newspaper in the city is for the loop," and practically all of the business organizations as well as the trades unions. It passed because people believed in it. Construction began in January 1920. Crews tunneled under what would become Central Parkway and carved out 6 stations, 4 underground, 3 above grade. By 1923, the main underground tunnel was structurally complete. By 1927, much of the surface infrastructure was in place. Bridges had been built, retaining walls had been poured, the right-of-way had been cleared and prepared for 16 miles of rapid transit. No track was ever laid, no subway car was ever ordered. No passenger ever descended those stairs. And that is where the story gets complicated. The official explanation is economic. World War I drove construction costs far beyond the original estimates. Political infighting between the city and county stalled critical decisions for years. By the time the project might have recovered, the stock market had crashed and the Great Depression had made public spending on ambitious transit infrastructure politically and financially impossible. All of that is true. All of that is documented. But it is not the complete picture. Consider what was happening simultaneously above ground. By 1920, the automobile had transformed from a novelty into a defining feature of American urban life. Between the time Cincinnati's subway was first planned and the time its tunnels were actually dug, the number of registered automobiles in the city had multiplied nearly 30 times. The car industry was no longer a curiosity. It was one of the most powerful economic and political forces in the country. Historical records document that auto industry lobbying against public transit projects was systematic and well-funded during this exact period. General Motors, Firestone, Standard Oil, and associated interests had clear financial incentives. A functioning subway system reduced car ownership. A city that moved efficiently underground was a city that needed fewer roads, less fuel, and fewer vehicles. The economics were simple, and the industry understood them well. In Cincinnati specifically, city records note that the Transit Board was dissolved in 1928 under a newly elected mayor who had campaigned on different priorities. Central Parkway, a wide, modern automobile boulevard, was constructed directly above the subway tunnel. Not beside it, not around it, directly on top of it. The city paved over its own investment and called the road progress. The tunnels didn't disappear. They went dark. Through the 1930s and 1940s, proposals kept surfacing and dying. Run trolleys through the tunnel. The platform curves were too sharp for standard trolley cars. Route automobile traffic underground, engineers ruled it structurally unsuitable. Use the tunnel as an air raid shelter during World War II. City records indicate this was seriously considered, but not formally implemented. In 1969, a local diocese wanted to hold a candlelight communion service for 500 people in what they called the Catacombs of Cincinnati. The insurance company refused to underwrite it. Every proposal ended the same way. The tunnels remained sealed. In the 1950s, portions of the original subway right-of-way were absorbed into the construction of Interstate 75. Above ground, the elevated sections of the transit loop, the bridges, the stations, the viaducts, were demolished and replaced with freeway ramps. The physical evidence of Cincinnati's transit ambition was being systematically erased from the surface of the city, piece by piece, decade by decade. But underground, the tunnels held. They were maintained at public expense because the city had no choice. Central Parkway was built on top of them, and any structural failure Below ground would compromise the road above. The concrete held. The stations held. Engineers who have inspected the tunnels in recent years consistently describe the construction quality as exceptional. A structure built in the early 1920s, never used, still viable a century later. Which brings us to Liberty Street Station, and to 1960, and to something the city of Cincinnati never announced. The Cold War had fundamentally changed how the American government thought about urban infrastructure. Nuclear attack was no longer a theoretical concern reserved for military planners. It was the organizing anxiety of an entire civilization. Every major American city was asked to develop contingency plans. Where would essential government personnel shelter? How would civil authority be maintained after a strike? Who would coordinate the response and from where? Federal and local authorities looked at the sealed Cincinnati subway tunnels and recognized something useful. Here was an existing underground space, built with public funds, already maintained, already isolated from the surface, already below the blast radius of most conventional warhead scenarios. It required no new excavation. It required no new land acquisition. It was simply there, waiting beneath a city that had forgotten about it. In the early 1960s, city records and on-site documentation from subsequent decades indicate that Liberty Street Station, one of the 4 sealed underground platforms, was systematically converted into a functioning fallout shelter. Ventilation systems were installed to filter outside air, water storage tanks were put in place. The station's open platform area was divided using cinder block partitions, creating discrete rooms for different functions. Toilet facilities were built in. Rows of military-style cots and bunk beds were arranged along the walls. The shelter was designed to house city, county, and federal government officials in the event of a nuclear emergency. The documented intent was straightforward. Officials would descend into the sealed station, the entrances would be secured from the inside, and they would wait, indefinitely if necessary, for conditions above ground to become survivable. No public vote authorized this conversion. No city council resolution announced it. No local newspaper covered the installation. The citizens of Cincinnati, the same citizens who had overwhelmingly approved the subway bond in 1916, who had watched their tax money fund the excavation, who had been living for 40 years above a tunnel that produced nothing, were not informed that their abandoned infrastructure had been repurposed as a government survival facility. Urban explorers who have accessed the tunnels in the decades since have documented what remains. Old bunk frames, partitioned areas consistent with the shelter configurations described in city records, aged ventilation fixtures, artifacts of a Cold War contingency that most of Cincinnati never knew existed and has never been formally told about. The bunker was never publicly decommissioned. There was no ceremony, no press release, no formal announcement of closure, because there had never been a formal announcement of opening. Today, a large water main runs through the tunnel carrying part of Cincinnati's municipal water supply. Fiber optic cables have been threaded through the same passages where fallout shelter cots once stood. The city funds the tunnel's ongoing maintenance from public tax revenue because structurally it has no alternative. Central Parkway is built on top of it. In late 2024, the city issued a formal request for information asking the public to submit proposals for what the tunnels might finally become. Responses included underground kayaking, art installations, speakeasies, community gardens, and bike paths. A formal request for proposals followed in September 2025. As of now, no use has been selected. The tunnels remain sealed. The Cincinnati Subway is often described as the largest abandoned subway system in the United States. That framing makes it sound like an accident, a project that stalled, ran out of money, and was simply forgotten. But the record is more deliberate than that. A transit system was built with citizen approval and citizen money, then defunded through a combination of economic collapse and documented political opposition from industries that profited from its failure. The physical evidence of its existence was erased from the city's surface. And when the tunnels proved useful again, useful to the government specifically, for purposes the government chose not to disclose, they were converted and activated without public knowledge or public consent. The question worth sitting with isn't just what killed the Cincinnati Subway. It's who decided that the people who paid for it didn't need to know what was built inside it afterward. Beneath Central Parkway, the platforms are still there. The stations are intact. The water runs through pipes laid in spaces that were once designated for government survival. And somewhere in that sealed, maintained, publicly funded darkness, the record of those decisions still exists, waiting for someone to look. If this investigation was worth your time, subscribing to the channel keeps this work going. Every new video follows a different sealed door, and there are more of them than most people realize.